I never liked having to dress up for Easter, and when I grew up, it was a really big deal. Also a big deal was just my mom taking me Easter shopping, and I hated that shopping trip. Anybody else have scars from Easter clothing shopping? Yeah, I see you and I feel your pain. I didn't like the shopping for Easter as a kid, but I did love, as a kid, I loved Easter egg hunts. That was a really big deal. It made me wonder, as I was thinking about this morning, where Easter eggs actually came from, how that tradition even got started. I did a little homework, found out there's actually a couple of reasons of why Easter egg hunting is a thing for Easter. The first reason makes all kinds of sense. Several hundred years ago, way back in the day of the church in Europe, one of the things that people would give up for Lent for Easter would be eggs. And so you couldn't, no eggs for, the whole time for Lent. You get to start having eggs again on Easter Sunday. And so over time, about 700 or so years ago, they began to decorate the eggs. It makes sense. It was a big deal to get to have eggs back in your diet. And so that's where the whole decorating eggs thing came from. Another thing then began to happen as people began to see eggs as like this big treat that you could enjoy on Easter once again. A connection between the egg and the resurrection began to be made. And if you think about an egg, you can see that, right? I mean, the eggshell itself functions a bit like a tomb. And then what happens? There's a breakout and new life occurs. You can see the connection. And so that connection was drawn between the egg and between Easter. The egg became a kind of a symbol of this resurrection hope that makes Easter worthwhile. I mean, without Jesus breaking forth from the tomb, the story of Easter isn't a story of hope at all if you stop and think about it. I mean, it all begins with betrayal, and then it moves to an arrest, and then it moves to torture, and then to execution, and then a graveside. Now, there's no hope in any of that. I can't think of any place more hopeless than a trip to the graveside. Now, some of you have probably been there. Some of y'all have probably been there recently. That sense of hopelessness that you feel in that moment of grief is absolutely debilitating. And if we don't find a remedy for that hopelessness, we're going to be in real trouble. Maybe for you, that graveside moment that I talked about just a little bit ago, maybe that graveside moment is fresh in your mind. You're dealing and processing with the loss of somebody important to you, and that loss is recent. Man, let me just tell you, if you're dealing with hopelessness right now, you've come to the right place. Because this morning, that's what we're going to be talking about. We're going to talk about how hopelessness is not a part of the Easter story at all, because the Easter story does not end at the grave. The story goes beyond the grave to the resurrection, and nothing sources hope like the resurrection. Nothing at all. So if you're struggling with hopelessness, or if you're knowing somebody who is struggling with hopelessness right now, I want you to just pay attention for the next few moments, because the resurrection hope is all built on an irrefutable moment in history where God acted in a seemingly impossible way. Well, the Bible is teaching us something. It's teaching us that with overwhelming certainty, Jesus Christ really did rise from the dead. Now, Christianity is the only religion in the entire world that isn't built on law. It isn't built on philosophy. Now, Christianity is built on historical certainty. Now, what does the fact of the resurrection have to do with hope? Well, because if Jesus really had the power over life and death, he can clearly be a source of hope for you and for me. He's proven through the resurrection that he can make good on his promises. So think about it this way. Because of the resurrection, you and I can trust exactly what Jesus teaches us to be true. Okay? If he has the power to defeat the grave, then surely he knows a bit about how we ought to live our life. If he has that kind of connection with God the Father, then surely he understands the purity of God, the holiness of God. And so when Jesus gives us instruction about how we ought to live, it would make sense that we could base our life on it. Here's another idea. Because of the resurrection, we can count on the fact that Jesus is alive today, and it makes all the sense in the world to pray to him. It doesn't make any sense to me at all to think about somebody praying to an idol. It doesn't make any sense at all for someone to pray to a God that doesn't exist. You might have been there yourself. You might know somebody else who's been there. You might have seen it in a movie where someone says, God, if you exist, I'm asking you to do this thing for me. You've seen that before. Does that make any sense at all? I mean, if God doesn't exist, why in the world would you pray to him? If Jesus isn't alive today, if the resurrection never happened, how would it make any sense at all to pray to him? But if the resurrection happened, praying to Jesus makes perfect sense. Here's another idea. Because of the resurrection, we can count on Jesus Christ to secure our eternity. Now think about this. If Jesus is still in the grave, if he died, was crucified and died, laid in the tomb, and that's the end of the story, then anybody who would count on Jesus to secure our eternity, they're just a fool. That doesn't make any sense at all. But if Jesus really is raised from the dead, then relying on Jesus to secure our eternity, well, that makes perfect sense, doesn't it? That would be wise. That'd be the right thing to do. There's nothing that I can think of that sources our hope like the truth of the resurrection of Jesus Christ. Because the resurrection is the only hope that we have that's built on both the promise of God and the action of God himself. Now, because resurrection hope is anchored in the fact of God's work, it is incredibly different than anything else that we think of as hope in our kind of common experience in our world today. We look at wishful thinking and we call wishful thinking hope. And we do this all the time. We just want something really bad, and so we say, I hope that happens. There's another thing that we can bank, that we call hope. And that would be the whole idea of kind of a dream or ambition that we have, a goal that we might set. And we tell ourselves, I'm going to set myself this goal, and then I'm going to work really hard for that goal, and then I can count on it happening. I have hope that this is going to occur because I've set a goal and I'm going to work hard for it. Now, I want to be real clear here. I set goals for myself all the time. You probably do too. Right? I set goals for myself all the time, and when I set a goal, what sense does it make to set a goal and not work hard to see it coming? That would make no sense whatsoever. But there's a big difference between setting a goal and working hard for it and banking on that for my hope. Because when I set a goal and when I then determine to work really hard to see that goal achieved, there's a huge limiting factor there. You know what it is? My capacity. Because of the resurrection, I have a real hope that I can be born again. Think about that for a moment. I have real hope because of the resurrection that all of my history and all of my baggage and all of my old life can be set aside. How can I have that kind of hope? I can have that hope, the Bible says, because the resurrection is real. I can have a hope for an inheritance in heaven. I can look forward to an eternal future. Why can I look forward to that kind of future? I can look forward to that kind of future because I have hope in the resurrection. And I can have that hope in my day-to-day life right now. I love the way that it says here in 1 Peter that God is protecting me by his power. I love that idea. My day-to-day life is secure because of the power of God. That's what resurrection hope looks like. And the source of that hope isn't wishful thinking. The source of that hope isn't positive thinking. The source of that hope isn't my goal setting and then me working really hard toward it. My hope is based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. And because that event really did happen, because God really did intervene in that way in human history, God has completely reset my future. And he's made it possible for me to build my hope on the power of God.